Despite the lackluster play at times, despite all the criticism, despite everything, a Big Ten championship still sits straight ahead for Ohio State in a possible college football playoff berth. Of course, it's Ohio State Northwestern on Saturday night in Indianapolis. We bring in Steve Hellwagon. He is a Big Ten senior writer at 247 Sports. You can catch him on Bucknuts for the best in Ohio State football coverage. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to heading to Indianapolis on Friday.
All right. Absolutely. And we'll be looking forward to your coverage there against the Wildcats. Before we focus on the game ahead, of course, we've got to talk about this historic, epic showing by the Buckeyes that put them in this position, not just to get to the Big Ten championship game, but in the manner in which they disposed of Michigan is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, no question about it, Mark. I mean, Ohio State entered the game as an underdog for the first time since the 2015 national championship game against Oregon, a span of over 50 games. And with the win, I think the record improved to 6-0 for Ohio State as a point spread underdog with Urban Meyer as the coach. Most of those happened in that 2014 season when the Buckeyes went to the national championship game. They were an underdog at Michigan State to Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game that they won 59-0. And we'll have to come back around on that one because that's got some historical pertinence as we move forward here in a moment. But then Alabama and Oregon certainly. So there was 4 of them right there. There was another game that eludes my memory, but very historic win for Ohio State. Most points the Buckeyes have scored against Michigan, breaking the record of 50, set 1961 and 1968. And then obviously they put up 62 points in this game, won the game 62-39, and it was just a tremendous showing, certainly, for the Buckeyes to win the division in a tie, obviously, with Michigan, but they win the head-to-head tiebreaker, and will be going on to Indianapolis to play against Northwestern, the West Division champion, in the championship game.
Yeah, I used to have an exact handle on all the underdog games in which Urban Meyer had won at Ohio State. It's either up to 6 or 7. I'll have to try to write those down at some point. But, yeah, it definitely includes that 2014 season, the 3 in a row, the Michigan State earlier. Were they not, and this was shocking to me at the time, but in 2015 with that remarkable roster they had, even though they dropped the one game to Michigan State, didn't they go to Michigan the next week as like a 2-point underdog in that one?
That game may have been a pick'em, I think, according to my Phil Steele, handy dandy Phil Steele, which I've got right here. This guy, this is the Bible. You can't live without it. It's Absolutely. Got all the reference information in it. I think he's got it listed as a pick'em that day. Ohio State. It says even here. I'm not sure what the other game would have been. Wisconsin.
I remember I picked up a couple points myself on that Michigan game in 2015, but the Wisconsin game in 2012 when they were on the road and won in overtime, that was
that may have been it. That may have been it. Because they had a really good team at Wisconsin that year, and that year is not in this book. He only goes back 5 years. So I've got another book. This is crazy. I store these books because if you store the right book, you can have up to 15 or 20 years of data. And I do all these picks and everything. You need to have all that useless data from 1999 to pick a game in 2018. But that is ringing a bell that it could have been in 2012 when Ohio State, they went 12-0, but it was not what you'd call a dominant 12-0. There were some cracks in the armor, obviously, that year, but they somehow won all the games. So that could very well have been it. I think they won the game in overtime, 21-14 or something. Monte Ball, I think, was on that team, and Ryan Shazier, and they had a goal line stand, and et cetera. But yeah, it has been very rare for Ohio State with Urban Meyer to be an underdog, and they were about a 4.5-point underdog last week to the University of Michigan. First time Michigan was favored in Columbus since 2004 when Michigan won the Big Ten championship, and the Buckeyes defeated them 37-21. Michigan has now still not won in Columbus since 2000, and certainly, you think about all the other streaks and everything. The Buckeyes have now won 14 of the last 15 against Michigan. They've matched their record of 7 straight wins. Jim Tressel's team had that from 2004 to 2010. They've matched it. The 2010 game was actually vacated because of NCAA sanctions. So if you're really a stickler for the rules, this is the new record at 7 straight. So, and they'll be going for 8 next year at the University of Michigan. And, they've got I'm old enough to remember when Michigan had a 21-game lead in this series, and now it's down to 7 because Ohio State has gained 14 games when they've gone 16-2 over the last 18 years. So got it down to 7. The earliest that they can even it would be 2025 if they continue on this pace. And I'm 50, going on 51 years old. Maybe before I die, they will have reeled them in. I don't know. We'll see.
And Steve, you've probably done this yourself. In years past, looking at the all-time record, I've thought, okay, they're down by 15. They win 60% of the games. It'll probably take like 70 years to come back and take. But boom, there it is. Within 14 or 15 years, they've shaved
Ohio
it off.
State went through the 90s where they only won twice and had a tie in that decade. And they've more than paid them back with the 2000s and now the whatever we call these, the 2010s, or it'll be easier next decade when we say the 2020s, but the roaring 20s. But this decade, I guess, is the teens or the 2010s or whatever you put it. But Ohio State has more than paid them back for that one bad decade.
And you mentioned that 2004 game. That is a game in which Troy Smith, Teddy Ginn, and Santonio Holmes really went off and foreshadowed
big coming out party.
In
yeah,
05.
Big coming out party for them.
No doubt. Really good stuff in the Michigan series, and obviously the explosion of 62 points last week. We'll get to the Buckeyes and the Wildcats in just a second, but while we're holding on to this series, I want to get your take on Jim Harbaugh, the Michigan game in regards to the Wolverines' approach. And obviously they're going to get hammered with criticism of not showing up for a big game, not being prepared, maybe being archaic. Of course, the pendulum's going to swing way too far for a team that's 10-2 and accomplished everything that they did. But just your thoughts about Jim Harbaugh and the criticism that he's facing right now.
They've had a very good year, and I don't think you and I did a segment last week, but the talking point I came back to was if you put the two records side by side through 11 games, Michigan had by far the better season through 11 games. And so I don't think you can say one game just throws their whole season or his career or anything away. Now, he's 0-4 against Ohio State, and I get that. Each game is kind of an animal unto its own within the course of this rivalry. People can make snap judgments all they want. I think he's a very good football coach. They had a very good year, tied for the division championship. Only losses are to two teams in the top 6. No bad losses. Notre Dame at number 3 and Ohio State at number 6. So it wasn't like in past years where they've lost to a Rutgers or lost to a Maryland or somebody that they shouldn't have lost to. So they had a very good year. They've got great players. And moreover, what I think it'll be very short-sighted if anybody, and I don't hear or sense anybody at Michigan saying that they want to make a change. He's been worlds better than Rich Rodriguez or Brady Hoke, who followed Lloyd Carr. Even better than Lloyd Carr. The last 4 or 5 years Lloyd Carr was there, although 2006 Lloyd had a great team, no doubt. But I think, and he was obviously there when they won the championship or a share of the championship in 1997. So I think that they have to stay the course. I think, coming back to your question, what did we learn about these two programs or glean from this game? It's that Ohio State's decided advantage in recruiting is something that is very difficult to overcome when Ohio State comes and plays enthused football and plays motivated football and plays good football. That hasn't been the case all season. Ohio State has been the word I used for Michigan State all year was meandering around, playing a tight game with Utah State, losing to Arizona State, just meandering around was kind of the word I used. That's also true of Ohio State. They'd been kind of meandering around most of the year. Close game with Nebraska, have to go to overtime to beat Maryland, give up a ton of points. Five plays of 50 yards or longer against Maryland. It's inexplicable. It's inexcusable. So Ohio State, didn't come into this game as a pat hand or anything like that. But what they had was they had a team that was enthused and motivated and properly prepared to go in and take care of business against the University of Michigan. I think Michigan's style play also played into Ohio State's hands. They don't play the spread offense that a lot of the other schools play. They tried to establish the run. Shea Patterson did probably the best he was going to do against Ohio State's pass defense, which still gave up a few plays. And Ohio State's defense played the best game they've played most of the year. When you stop and think that through 3 quarters, Michigan, I think, had scored 20 points, and 7 of those came after Ohio State had fumbled the kickoff at the 9-yard line. So through 3 quarters, Michigan's offense from their own 20 to the Ohio State end zone had only earned 13 points. So that is by far, at least those 3 periods, the best Ohio State's defense has played. And Michigan, unfortunately, was on the other end, for their standpoint, was on the other end of their best performance to date. So obviously, the fourth quarter, the game had been decided, and the teams got into a thing where they were basically trading touchdowns at that point to get out of there to end the game. But that's just my overall thought, is that Ohio State's immense recruiting advantage. I mean, you have Paris Campbell taking the little pop pass on the sweep, and he turns the corner, and there's nobody there. I mean, you say, oh, lack of team speed, whatever. They've got team speed. It's just Paris Campbell is an absolute freak. And so, those things they caught Johnny Dixon, caught him on a coverage break for a touchdown. There wasn't anybody even the same township as him in that south end zone when he caught the ball. I mean, Josh Metellus was 25 yards away, and he's looking over at the other corner, the other safety, like, where were you? You weren't where you were supposed to be. And I mean, that was miserably bad for Michigan, that play. But, the Buckeyes played their best game, I think, offensively and defensively. I mean, when you look at what they did offensively against the nation's number 1 ranked defense is pretty telling. Over 500 yards and 62 points. They made their statement, and whether it's going to be enough, coupled with what they're going to do this week against Northwestern to get them into the playoff, remains to be seen.
Yeah, so when you use the term meandering at Michigan State with top 30 to 35 talent, that's what results in a 7-5 record. When you meander around at Ohio State with top 5 talent, then you enter the Michigan game at 10-1, and you need to then
play a lot of close games
and play like a top 5 team.
And I'll just say, I mean, Michigan, back on Michigan again, I don't think you can overstate how good a season that they had. In one 3-week stretch, they took Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Penn State, I may not have the exact order, to the woodshed. All 3 of them preseason top 15 teams, beat them all like a drum. I mean, 42-7 over a very good 9-3 Penn State team kind of says it all. The Michigan State game was a mess. It was played in the rain and whatever. So whatever that was, and they demolished Wisconsin by the time that game was over. And we know Wisconsin had their own struggles. But at any rate, I think last thought about Michigan, at least their program, or one of the last things I will say is what comes next is very important for them. It sounds like Rashawn Gary obviously is going pro, may not play in their bowl game. I don't know if that's been determined or not. They asked Devin Bush the other day on Big Ten Network if he plans to play in their bowl game, and he said he did plan to play in the game. So Michigan has not done well in bowl games. I can't remember the last time they won a bowl game. They were the only Big Ten team to lose a bowl game last year. If they want some of the onus off this loss off their back, they need to go out and beat Central Florida or whoever they get put in front of them. I'm going to presume the Fiesta Bowl, maybe the Peach Bowl. Hard to say. Whoever they end up with, Washington State, whatever it may be, they need to go out and win the game. I mean, it's time that they go out and go into an offseason with some good thoughts surrounding their program. And that's how you continue to perpetuate success is to finish the season on a high note, and they haven't done that. So either with Ohio State or the bowl game.
So off the top of my head, Steve, yeah, Harbaugh did beat Florida his first year, so he capped off what was a really hopeful season, coming off 5-7, winning 10, beating Florida. But the last two, yeah, they blow a 16-point lead against South Carolina last year. They lose a really a thriller against Florida State in the Orange Bowl. I'm thinking it was beating Tim Tebow as the Heisman Trophy winner in 07 at the Citrus Bowl or the Capital One Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, their bowl wins have kind of been few and far between, and I think they're going to get a marquee opponent, whether, again, it's all speculation at this point, depending on how the chips fall. I'm going to assume, and the committee still had them at 7 or 8 this week, and somebody asked me, well, why didn't they fall farther? And I'm like, there's a dearth of 2-loss teams. I mean, everyone, either you have 1 loss or you have 3. There aren't many 2-loss teams left. And you're not going to put them below a 3-loss team, because look at who they lost to. They didn't lose to any bad teams. They lost to Notre Dame and Ohio State. They deserve to be in the top 10. They are almost certain to be in the New Year's Six. The only 2 places that they can go, though, because the Sugar Bowl and the Rose Bowl are closed off to them. The Sugar Bowl is SEC Big 12 automatically. And the winner of the Big 10 championship game will play, if it's Northwestern, will play there. If Ohio State wins and goes to the playoff, it's possible Michigan would replace Ohio State at the Rose Bowl and play the Washington-Utah winner. So that'd be a great consolation prize for them as well.
Well, that's because most people are reactionary to the last result, and therefore they think Michigan should drop to 12 or 14 or 15. They don't look at, okay, let's
I'm still bullish on Jim Harbaugh. The guy coached in the Super Bowl with the 49ers. I mean, he's a very good football coach, and he has done a few things recruiting-wise to get – you look at this talent. NFL rosters are filled with Michigan guys and, are going to be filled with Michigan guys that he recruited there as well. Winovich, Bush, on down the line. I mean, they're going to have their share.
So let's look at the team, obviously, that took Michigan to the limit and almost handed them their first loss in the Big Ten with a 17-0 lead at Ryan Field, and that's Northwestern. And you talk about meandering. Meandering's the result at Northwestern, but that's not the way they play. They're on point, but because of maybe a lack of talent in certain areas, it turns out to look like a meandering team, because when you look at an odd season, that's an odd season. You give up your most points to Akron. You lose to Akron. You lose to Duke by 2 touchdowns. You get off to a 1-3 start. Then they beat all the teams that they needed to beat in the Big Ten West to put themselves in a championship situation with 2 weeks left to play. Not only do they win the Big Ten West, they do it with 2 weeks to play. And they were an underdog. You talk about being an underdog. They were underdog against Minnesota even, and still won all those games. And here they are, vying for the Big Ten championship.
Yeah, no question about it. 0-3 in non-conference play, lost to Duke, lost to Akron, and then played Notre Dame very close there in November, a game in Evanston, and gave them really a good game. Notre Dame, I think, scored a late touchdown to kind of put it away, 31-21. Northwestern has had one of the best years it's had in recent memory. I think they had a 10-win season, I think, recently with Coach Fitzgerald. This game coming up is probably the biggest game in the modern history of Northwestern football, at least in this century, I guess. In 2000, they won the Big Ten, shared it with Purdue, I believe, that season. They've played some big-time opponents, obviously, in the 20 years since. But this game would mean so much for Northwestern. They have new facilities right on Lake Michigan is where they practice. If you shanked a punt, the ball would go into the lake. We got to tour their facility. I took my daughter on a campus visit there a couple of years ago, and very impressed with everything you see with the campus and everything they have going on with for them. They have a very good football team. They have a quarterback, Clayton Thorson, who has made 51 consecutive starts. He and Browning at Washington are tied in that category nationally among active players at the quarterback position with 51 consecutive starts. That's impressive enough considering the injuries he's gone through in his time there. I think it was a bad knee injury from the bowl game last year, and there was touch and go whether he would be back for the season opener against Purdue. Not only was he back, but they won the game at Purdue to open the season. But then they lost their next 3 games, Duke, Akron, and Michigan. They were ahead of Michigan 17-0 in that game. Michigan stormed back and won the game 20-17. They and Ohio State have played 6 common opponents. Ohio State had a better differential or better outcome with 5 of the opponents. The one difference would have been the loss. Obviously, for Ohio State, 29-point loss at Purdue, whereas Northwestern went in there and won the game by 4. Ohio State, in the other 5 games, would have the better differential. Something to think about. I was watching the Northwestern-Illinois game from last week on DVR today, and they made a point. James Laurinaitis was on the broadcast with, I think it was Kevin Kugler perhaps, and they were talking about how a donor at Northwestern put up money so that they could buy tickets for as many students who wanted to attend this game in Indianapolis as possible. They had 3,500 takers. So 45% of their student body of about 8,000 students, 3,500 of them will be in Indianapolis for this game. They have rented 58 buses to take these students from 16 different companies in Chicagoland to get these kids, the purple, to Indianapolis. And if Ohio State fans are of a belief that Northwestern is just going to walk in there and roll over and play the victim like Wisconsin did a few years ago, I think they're going to be sadly mistaken. I think and Coach Meyer has scouted the team and has great respect for Coach Fitzgerald, considers him a man's man. I'm sorry, how could you not? He was a All-American and a college football Hall of Fame award winner. And was part of, the great success they had there with Gary Barnett in the 90s, going to the Rose Bowl at Northwestern, which nobody ever would have thought was humanly possible. So I lived through those days. I know that Northwestern can be dangerous. Ohio State is a 2-touchdown favorite, and I think most people, most onlookers, are of a belief that Ohio State will carry over what they did against Michigan into this game. As somebody said, you're playing for a ring now. That's all the motivation. You're playing for your place in history as a Big Ten champion. That should be all the motivation that Ohio State needs to go out and play, again, its best football or one of its best games, and that ought to be good enough, you would think, against Northwestern. But, again, you're going to get their best shot. And defensively, I don't think anybody gives them kind of the credit that they deserve. They're in the 40s, I think, in total defense. But if you look at their numbers the last 6 games, including the 31 that they gave up to Notre Dame, I think the opponents have only scored an average of 16 or 17 points. So they have done an outstanding job the last half of the season defensively. And Patty Fisher, their linebacker, is outstanding. They've got some really good players on that defense. And as Coach Meyer said, they play a lot of zone coverages that keep the play in front of them. They are not prone to giving up big hitters, which Ohio State talked about with Campbell would like to get, even if it's a short play that turns into a big play. Maybe that's how Ohio State will have to try and attack them. They're going to try and establish the run with Mike Weber, J.K. Dobbins. Weber had close to 100 yards this past week against Michigan, and Dobbins had 200 yards the week before against Maryland. So that's quite a 1-2 punch that the Buckeyes can throw at them, but Northwestern has a really good front seven as well. We'll see if the Buckeyes can succeed in establishing the run. Again, it's hard for me to get out of my head that 59-0 game with Wisconsin just because it was such a fast track. And I've been there when Wisconsin this will be the 4th or 5th time in 8 years I've covered this game. I even covered it twice when Wisconsin played Michigan State in the first one, which was a high-scoring game, and then they hung 70 with 400 yards rushing on Nebraska in year 2. Wisconsin did on this field in Indianapolis. So for a college game, with the way the field can get spread and the hash marks and everything else, the way these teams can move the football, we'll see if Ohio State can take full advantage as they did against Wisconsin the first time. They did not take full advantage other than one pass over the top to Terry McLaurin last year against Wisconsin.
And if I remember right, Paris Campbell had a like play to what he did against Michigan last week against Wisconsin last year, where he turned the corner and nobody could catch him.
That's a good point as well. He has become probably their number one weapon on a team where you could list the weapons as 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. He's probably one with a bullet just because of the way he can flip the field. TCU was a very close game in the third quarter when he caught that close screen, design screen coming back to the quarterback and turned upfield and was gone like an 80-yard play, and that really kind of flipped the momentum in that game. And those are the kind of big plays that he is capable of giving Ohio State at times. I know one thing I would like to broach is, and I'm sure it'll probably come up, is just college football playoff. And it was interesting that Coach Meyer was asked about the playoff, and he immediately said, well, Northwestern's got a good kickoff unit. They've got a good punt unit. He turned all of the discussion back to Northwestern because he knows fully well that would be utter disrespect to even breathe the word playoff publicly before the game is played, obviously, before you've won this game. So that was kind of refreshing to see that in all the speculation of what can they do to outlast Oklahoma or outshine Oklahoma to get into the championship game, he knows first and foremost they have no chance unless they play their best game against Northwestern, and that's where the entire focus, entire move is right now is on Northwestern. I think it's interesting that at noon on Saturday you'll have Texas-Oklahoma, where if Texas can beat Oklahoma, then it would appear all Ohio State needs to do is go out and win the game, all things being considered equal. If Alabama doesn't get upset by Georgia, etc. Clemson, Pittsburgh was terrible last week against Miami, but the way these teams bounce back and swing on a pendulum, they're going to give Clemson probably a very good shot. And they've beaten Clemson in the last 2 or 3 years. So that's not out of their own possibility, but that doesn't really take a bid from somebody. They'd just be taking their own bid, that they've already locked in. Alabama, if they lose, is going to take somebody else's bid, I think, is what is potentially the issue. So 2 things in play. I think Ohio State fans want Texas to win or Oklahoma to lose ugly, just like Ohio State did last year against Wisconsin, which was kind of the round the bend I was coming to. Is last year Ohio State played a 12-0 Wisconsin team, and you thought just win the game and you're in with 2 losses. But they won the game, but they had 3 turnovers and looked terrible, 27-21. And the committee, left them at the altar and took Alabama, which was the right call. Alabama was the better team. Alabama proved it. They went on and won the national championship. Ohio State was the 5th seed, went on and played USC in the Cotton Bowl. So Ohio State needs to win, look good doing it, hope that Texas can somehow, reprise their win that they've already had over Oklahoma again, and also hope that Alabama holds serve in the SEC championship game. A lot of variables there for Ohio State and their hopes and their chances, but if they don't win their game, nothing's out there. And if it is a consolation prize by winning the Big Ten and going to the Rose Bowl to play Washington or Utah, after the way Ohio State meandered through its season, hey, sometimes you get what you deserve. And in this instance, win, lose, or draw, however it turns out, they're going to get what they deserve.
Similarly to Urban Meyer's response, I heard Lincoln Riley on ESPN Radio asked about what they need to do, meaning style points against Texas, and he completely avoided the question and just said, hey, we need to do anything we possibly can just to win this game. And
that's their rival.
We can.
That's their rival. He certainly can't disrespect his rival. He has to line up and play them in the Cotton Bowl Stadium every year. So if he made some kind of, beyond looking statement about a team that's already beaten them, I mean, they would hold that against him till the end of time. Ohio State Northwestern have only been playing sporadically. And it's worth noting that under Meyer, Ohio State's played them twice. In 2013 at Northwestern, Ohio State and Scott Van Pelt will continue to play this on bad beats until long past the end of time. He is going to play this. He and Stanford Steve are going to have this as one of their all-time bad beats. Ohio State, I want to say, was a 6 or 7 point favorite. They never led throughout the full 60 minutes of regulation play by more than 2 or 3 points, whatever it was. I think it was a 4-point game, 34-30.
Mm-hmm.
And the final play, Northwestern ran a play from its own 25 or 30-yard line. The ball got fumbled and batted backwards, and Joey Bosa, as a freshman in 2013, landed on top of the ball in the end zone after the final tick had gone off, but the ball was still in play, and they didn't kick the extra point. Ohio State won the game 40-30 and covered the spread. And if you had Northwestern plus whatever it was, 5, 6, 7 that day, you probably wanted to commit suicide at the end of that one, because that is one of the – I mean, how do you – a pick-six interception you would think, but then a fumble and ball batted backwards. But what this is endemic of is Northwestern played Ohio State tough that day, and they played 2 years ago in Columbus. In Columbus, the result was 24-20, and here was Ohio State that was in the playoff talk, made the playoff as the 4 seed. I think lost to Clemson. Didn't win the Big Ten, but was only a one-loss team at the end of the regular season. So one of Ohio State's better teams, 2016, and Clayton Thorson threw for over 200 yards. He had a guy, Austin Carr, who's now in the NFL as a wide receiver, who had a field day, like 150 yards, I think, against them, and single-handedly kept Northwestern in that game. So the recent history has not been Ohio State blowing Northwestern out. It's been basically single-digit games. So we'll see if Ohio State can, find a way to put Northwestern away this time around.
Steve, I'm curious as whether there's been any discussion or any articles written on this Isaiah Bowser, considering that if you look at the Northwestern running back situation, Justin Jackson was prolific. He was the number 1 running back in the school's history in terms of all the major statistical categories. He moves on. Jeremy Larkin was a more explosive home run hitting back that they were excited about. Unfortunately, he had to retire due to spinal injuries. They were lost at running back for about 3 weeks. They played a wide receiver. They picked off another running back. They were all over the place. They only gained 8 yards on the ground against Michigan State and found a way to win. Then they come up with this Isaiah Bowser, who was the Mr. All Ohio player. And what do we know about him?
Yeah, how about that? I mean, it's been a tremendous season for him. Isaiah Bowser, I believe he's from the Dayton area, 736 yards he has on the season. And as you say, by adding that run component, for a few games there, they tried to beat teams with Thorson alone, just trying to throw the football. And he was taking a tremendous beating. And that was in that stretch there where they may have lost to Duke and lost to Akron, and were just kind of feeling their way through the wilderness and needed somebody to come through. And Bowser has been that guy for them. What can you say? That I believe he's a first-year player as well. I'm not sure if he's true freshman or redshirt freshman. Maybe a true freshman. I'm not sure. So they have really leaned on him down the stretch, and he has been tremendous godsend for them and given them balance that they didn't have, obviously, after they lost Larkin. Larkin had a great game there in the opener with Northwestern, and people, even in Ohio, were buzzing because he's a Cincinnati guy. People were buzzing about, what kind of a, great season he might have. And, obviously, the injury curtailed that for him. But it's unfortunate. Just imagine how good they'd be, had the running back from last year stuck around, had Larkin been healthy. I mean, they would have weapons across the board, and just the way that it's worked out. But Thorson is a winner. I saw a stat, believe it or not, he is the only player in the history of the Big Ten. He's among 6 10,000-yard passers, but among those 6 10,000-yard passers, he's the only one who's also rushed for 20 touchdowns in his career. So that says a lot when you take in over 100 years of Big Ten football and all the people who've played. And I assume Drew Brees is among those 10,000-yard passers and whoever else may be up there on that list. But really says a lot about what he accomplished and has accomplished in his time at Northwestern.
I knocked out a Northwestern preview a few days ago and looking at his stat line. Yeah, it's been impressive from the standpoint of leading two 10-win teams. This could be a third if they win the Big Ten championship and the bowl game. But at the same time, it's been an uneven performance. And obviously, he doesn't have the weapons that an Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State team would have. But 58 touchdowns, 42 interceptions in his career. So 14-12 this year. So maybe the Buckeyes can take advantage of maybe some uneven play and lack of extension on the field, being able to extend the defense down the field for the Wildcats.
Ohio State's pass rush after they lost Nick Bosa in week 3 against TCU was not very good. In recent weeks, it has improved. Jonathan Cooper has really stepped up. He had a sack in regular scrimmage play and also sacked Shea Patterson on a 2-point conversion that doesn't go into the defensive statistics. I think they got to Patterson 3 or 4 times, maybe 4 or 5 if you count the 2-point conversion as well. And so that's been better. The pass rush for Ohio State improved. Chase Young had a huge game against Penn State, then went through several weeks where you never heard his name called. And now here against Maryland, he had a couple of huge plays. And he hit Patterson last week to force an interception that I think Jordan Fuller had. Ohio State's not been really good on takeaways, Mark. They only had they had 2 interceptions last week. The safeties, Fuller and Brendan White, each had interceptions, and both of them came in Michigan's into the field to set up scores by the Buckeyes. But that'll tell you how important takeaways are. Michigan recovered the fumble on the kickoff by Ohio State, so there were 3 turnovers in the game. All 3 of them led directly to touchdowns for the team that received the turnover. And, again, proof positive that turnovers can get you beat and help you win games if you're able to take them away. Ohio State's not been great in that category. But, as you said, Thorson, given the dynamics of this team, and you wonder if he's pressing a little bit at times, has thrown a few picks. And if the Buckeyes could get 1 or 2 in this game, it'd be huge, no doubt about it.
We've got Ohio State in the Big Ten championship for a 4th time since the inaugural game in 2011, the first time for Northwestern showing up in Indianapolis. Steve Hellwagon on the line from 247 Sports to help us break it down. Catch his coverage at bucknuts.com. Steve, when do you release a prediction?
I'm getting ready to post it here on our site within the next hour or so. I do believe this is going to be a close game for most of the 3 quarters first 3 quarters, because, as we've said, Northwestern is probably not going to give up that long touchdown. If they do, it'll be an isolated instance and not a thing that's an avalanche. But I think Ohio State, with their run game, they are content with Dobbins getting 4 and 5 yards and Weber 4 and 5 yards. And to me, that was what was huge against Michigan. They didn't run for 200 yards against Michigan. They were in the 160 range. But on first down, Mark, they set up second and short all day long. They were getting 4, 5 yard, 6 yard chunks running the football on first down. And if you can do that against anybody, Michigan or anybody, you can have tremendous success. And I'm interested to see if they can do that, the same type of thing where on first down, give the ball to Weber, get 4 or 5 tough yards, and now you've got the whole playbook that you can work from. Crossing routes were deadly last week for Ohio State in those situations when it was second and short and they had to honor the run again. Ohio State was hitting them on the crossing routes and for big plays. So I want to see how that develops, but I do believe they'll chip away, and in the fourth quarter probably break one somewhere. Campbell, McLaurin, who's an Indianapolis guy, would love to get in the end zone in one of his last games as a college player in his hometown. I'm saying 41-21 Ohio State. I noticed on ESPN they had 15 different people picking the games on ESPN.com, and nearly all of them had it 45-25 or something like that, or even higher for the Buckeyes. And that is kind of, I guess people are of a belief Ohio State is a high-scoring offensive team. They've been in the 500-yard range 9 times out of 12 games this year, over 600 against Maryland, nearly 600 against Michigan. And if they can approach 500 in this game, they'd be in really good shape.
All right, 41-21. I settled on 34-23, so minus a touchdown and generally about in the same range. All right, Steve Hellwagon, always appreciate you stopping by, Steve, to talk Ohio State football.
Yep, no problem, Mark, anytime.